Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Chris Coleman. On May 5th, 2009, the Coleman family, who appeared to have the perfect life, was tragically murdered in their home just before 3 a.m. Let's examine the events of that night. A crime that left a lasting impact on many. Chris Coleman met his future wife, Sherry, while they were both serving in the military. For Sherry, it was love at first sight, and she knew immediately that Chris was the one she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. Within a few months of meeting, Sherry became pregnant with their first child, Garrett. As devout Christians, the couple married before Garrett was born. After Garrett's birth, Chris and Sherry had their second son, Gavin. Gavin was a lively child, whereas Garrett was more laid back, like his father. Both boys had lively personalities and were well behaved. Sherry was a devoted mother who would do anything to protect her sons. Chris was an excellent father, and the family enjoyed quality time together, laughing, playing, and cherishing every moment with their children. After leaving the military, the Colemans moved to Waterloo, Illinois, a small town, where they bought a house in an upscale neighborhood, courtesy of Chris's new job. Chris became the head of security for Joyce Meyer, a renowned TV evangelist and CEO of one of the world's largest Christian ministries. However, controversy arose due to Joyce's multi-million-dollar income and opulent lifestyle, which sparked criticism from some individuals. They accused her of being a greedy con artist who exploited her followers' fears, arguing that her financial success and lavish lifestyle conflicted with her religious teachings. As Joyce's bodyguard and personal security guard, Chris was responsible for monitoring and protecting her from hate mail and letters sent to her church, which often contained threats against her life, with people expressing their intentions to harm her. Chris earned a substantial salary of $100,000 per year, working for Joyce's ministry in St. Louis, Missouri, providing financial stability for his family. As part of his job as a bodyguard, Chris frequently accompanied Joyce on international trips, ensuring his safety while abroad. However, this arrangement meant Chris was away from home for extended periods, affecting his family life. One year, Chris was gone for 260 days, which took a toll on his family, especially his sons, Garrett and Gavin. The boys missed their father and would mark off each day on a calendar, eagerly waiting for his return. However, shortly after Chris came home, he would have to leave again, causing tension in his marriage to Sherry. Sherry felt overwhelmed, shouldering the responsibilities of both parents and underappreciated for managing the household alone. The constant cycle of Chris's absence strained their relationship. In October 2008, Chris visited Tampa, Florida, where his friend Sherry had gone to high school. Sherry got in touch with her old friend Tara Lintz and asked her to look out for Chris while he was in town. After settling in, Chris contacted Tara and they agreed to meet up. Tara kindly showed Chris around the city. On November 14th, 2008, at around 11 p.m., Chris received a disturbing email. The sender's email address was destroychris@gmail.com, and the subject line and content terrified him. The email warned Chris to stop working for Joyce Meyer, otherwise he or his family would be killed. Over the next few hours, more threatening emails arrived at the ministry from the same sender, repeating the threat and specifying a time and date when the attack on his family might happen. The sender seemed to know Chris's schedule and was aware that he would soon be traveling out of the country. Chris told Sherry about the threatening emails he'd been getting, and on the following Monday, he went to the local police station to report them. He explained that he'd been away from home a lot lately because he'd been traveling with Joyce Meyer Ministries. The police offered to increase their patrols around the house when Chris was away. But even with the extra police presence, Sherry was still afraid for her family's safety. Sherry was so scared that she once asked a friend to stay with her because she didn't feel safe staying alone in the house when Chris was away. She made it clear that she would do whatever it took to keep her family safe. To prove how serious she was, Sherry showed her friend that she had a gun and demonstrated how to hold it, just in case someone broke into the house while Chris was away and she wasn't there. 2 months after the death threats started, a mysterious hand-delivered letter arrived in the Coleman's mailbox. The letter was written in bold letters and was very demanding. It said, "Deny your God publicly or else. No more opportunities. Time is running out for you and your family." This threat was very ominous and specific, stating that if the Colemans didn't do what the writer wanted, they would face severe consequences. Sherry was deeply shaken by the disturbing message. The fact that someone had invaded her private space and threatened her and her family made her feel genuinely terrified throughout the ordeal. Sherry's fear grew more intense by the day. The letter she received was a constant reminder of the potential danger that lurked in the shadows, waiting to pounce. After getting a death threat in the mail, Sherry and her husband Chris decided to take extra measures to protect their family. As part of their safety plan, Chris installed surveillance cameras around their home. These cameras recorded the surroundings and sent the footage to a screen in their basement office. The footage was also saved on a digital video recorder, allowing Chris to keep a permanent record of any incidents. He hoped the cameras would help him identify the person behind the threats against their family. After the cameras were installed, the threats against the Colemans stopped. Life returned to normal for Chris, Sherry, and their sons, Garrett and Gavin. For a while, everything seemed fine. In April 2009, Sherry confided in others that she was feeling more optimistic about her marriage and was determined to make it work. She was relieved the death threats had stopped and felt a sense of happiness. However, Sherry's optimism was short-lived. A second ominous letter arrived at the Coleman home, warning her that her worst fears were about to become a reality. Chris, her husband, was unsettled by the letter's contents and decided to review the previous night's footage from their security camera. What he saw shocked him. A mysterious silhouette caught his attention, but its identity remained unclear. This new discovery reignited Sherry's fear for her own and her children's safety, plunging her back into a state of constant unease. The brief sense of security she had felt was now gone, replaced by the feeling that her worst nightmare was closing in. The local police boosted their efforts due to the rising threats against the Coleman family. A neighbor, Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow from the Columbia Police Department, took a keen interest in the case. Detective Barlow personally called Chris to discuss the situation. During their conversation, Detective Barlow mentioned that he had noticed Chris's recent work absences from home. He offered help, providing his cell phone number in case Chris needed anything or had concerns. Detective Barlow reassured Chris that he could respond faster in an emergency than the regular police. Detective Justin Barlow lived across the street from the Coleman family, so he set up video cameras to monitor their driveway over several weeks. Although the cameras captured footage of the Colemans going about their daily routines, they did not capture the person responsible for leaving the death threats. Despite his efforts, the videos did not provide any clues or information about the identity of the person behind the threatening messages. On May 5, 2009, Chris went to the gym at 5:45 a.m. After leaving his house around 5:30 a.m., he called his home phone at 6:45 a.m. to check if his wife Sherry and their sons were up and getting ready for school. When no one answered, Chris became worried and called his neighbor, Detective Justin Barlow, at 6:45 a.m. to ask for his help. Chris explained to Detective Barlow that he had been trying to reach Sherry while he was at the gym, but she wasn't picking up. This made Chris increasingly concerned, so he asked Detective Barlow to check on Sherry and the boys. Detective Barlow prepared himself by grabbing his essential items, including his weapon, handcuffs, flashlight, and radio, before heading to the Coleman residence. While waiting for backup to arrive, his main goal was to make contact with Sherry and ensure everything was okay. With a mix of anticipation and apprehension, Detective Barlow approached the door and knocked firmly, hoping to get a response. However, the silence that followed made him feel uneasy. The lights inside the house were off, and there was no sign of movement, which only added to his bad feeling. Within minutes of Detective Justin Barlow's arrival at the Coleman home, a patrol vehicle pulled up with an additional officer to assist him. The second officer was sent to the rear of the house to try to see through a door or window or establish contact with Sherry or the boys at the back of the house. But as soon as the officer reached the back, he found signs of forced entry into the basement. This discovery immediately grabbed Detective Barlow's attention, and he began to suspect that someone inside the house was in danger. Detective Barlow was deeply concerned for the safety of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin after discovering the signs of forced entry into the Coleman home. Detective Barlow and the second officer decided to enter the premises through the basement. They announced their presence, but received no response. As they thoroughly searched the basement, they found a disconnected video cable at the computer desk. This led them to conclude that the camera's digital video recorder had been taken. Detective Justin Barlow and another officer made their way up from the basement of the Coleman home, ascending the stairs to the main level. As they climbed, they noticed an increasingly strong smell of aerosol spray paint. Once they reached the top, they saw that the wall had been spray painted with derogatory messages targeting Chris, Sherry, and their sons. 13 minutes after Chris phoned Detective Justin Barlow, Chris returned home from the gym. The detective told him to wait outside while they searched the house. Chris complied, sitting quietly on the porch without asking questions or trying to enter. Meanwhile, a third officer arrived at the Coleman residence. The three officers knew they had to search the rest of the house for Sherry and her sons. As they went upstairs, they found more hate-filled messages spray-painted on the walls when they reached the second story of the Coleman home. Detective Justin Barlow entered Garrett's bedroom, the oldest son's room, and initially thought he was asleep. But when he got closer, the detective realized Garrett was dead. There were no signs of life, and his body was cold to the touch. Ligature marks around his neck indicated the young boy had been murdered by strangulation. The discovery of Garrett's lifeless body shocked Detective Barlow. In the next room, the second officer found Gavin, but to his horror, the boy was also dead, just like his brother. Gavin also had ligature marks around his neck, indicating he had been strangled. The killer had even spray-painted an obscene message on the bed sheets, making the scene even more horrific. The third officer entered the master bedroom, where he was met with a deeply disturbing scene. Sherry, like her sons, was lying lifeless across the bed, her hair scattered over her face, hiding her features. It was obvious to the officer that Sherry had been brutally murdered. As he surveyed the room, he noticed multiple bruises on Sherry's body, suggesting that she had fiercely resisted her attacker, fighting to defend herself and her sons. After Detective Justin Barlow and the officers discovered the lifeless bodies of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin, Chris entered the house, having waited outside for news about his family. Unaware of the gravity of the situation, Chris announced his presence. Detective Barlow then had the heartbreaking task of informing Chris that his entire family had been murdered. This devastating news crushed Chris, leaving him reeling. To give Chris some privacy to process the information, Detective Barlow accompanied him outside. However, as the reality of the situation set in, Chris's reaction was overwhelming. He became nauseous, and his body seemed to weaken. Overcome with grief, Chris curled up in a fetal position, unable to contain the torrent of emotions. The shock of the tragedy was too much for him to absorb. Chris couldn't comprehend the brutal way his family had been taken from him. In desperation, Chris reached out to his father, Ronald, and informed him that something had happened to Sherry and the boys. Ronald immediately realized Chris was in shock upon receiving the news. Ronald was equally stunned, unable to believe that this tragedy had befallen his family. News of the shocking murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin Coleman spread swiftly throughout Waterloo, Illinois, where the family lived. As the community awoke to the grim news, neighbors were left devastated and terrified. The Coleman family had always been perceived as the epitome of a perfect American family, with their charming sons, Garrett and Gavin, admired by everyone. In fact, one neighbor went so far as to say that everyone would want their children to be like Garrett and Gavin, who were always polite, helpful, and kind-hearted. For Sherry's brother and mother, the harsh reality of the brutal crime was impossible to accept. Chris Coleman, the husband and father, was taken to a nearby police station for questioning after his wife and 2 sons were discovered murdered. During the interrogation, Detective Justin Barlow asked Chris if he could shed any light on the killings. Chris expressed deep regret for leaving to go to the gym, leaving Sherry and the boys alone in the home. When Detective Barlow asked Chris if he had any idea who could have committed the murders, Chris claimed he had no idea. However, several aspects of Chris's behavior during the interview raised suspicions with the detective. One of the detective's initial concerns was Chris's lack of curiosity about the circumstances surrounding his wife and son's murder. Given the gravity of the situation, it seemed odd that Chris didn't ask questions about their deaths. Instead, he appeared uninterested in finding out the details. Additionally, the detective noticed that Chris tried to conceal scratches on his arms during the interview. He asked for a blanket, despite the warm room temperature, to hide the injuries. These scratches raised suspicions as the detective knew that Sherry, Chris's wife, had fought for her life. When questioned about the scratches, Chris claimed they resulted from installing a satellite dish the day before. During the police interview, Chris denied having an affair outside of his marriage. However, he admitted to having a close friendship with Tara, a cocktail waitress and high school friend of his wife's who lived in Florida. Chris claimed that his wife wouldn't have approved of their conversations, but he maintained that he had no intention of leaving his wife for Tara. He insisted that he would never consider betraying his family in such a way. A different story unfolded when detectives contacted Tara in Florida. Tara claimed that her relationship with Chris went beyond friendship, alleging a full-blown affair that started in November 2008. She handed over her phone and laptop to the police, which contained convincing evidence of their romance, including emails, explicit photos, and videos they had exchanged. When confronted with Tara's information, Chris confessed to seeing her more frequently than he initially admitted. Further investigation revealed that Chris and Tara had devised a secret meeting system, often coinciding with his work trips for Joyce Meyer. They would secretly meet at these locations, sometimes traveling to exotic destinations like Hawaii to spend time together away from their families. Chris claimed his relationship with Tara wasn't an affair, defining an affair as involving a deeper level of commitment and involvement than they had. However, detectives found contradictory evidence on Tara's phone and computer, including a calendar marked with a wedding to Chris and scheduled vacations, suggesting she believed he would leave his family for her. This evidence raised suspicions, contradicting Chris's assertion that their relationship was casual. Chris's father, Ronald, was shocked by the revelation, but insisted that the affair had no connection to the murders of Chris's wife and son. He described Chris as gentle and non-violent, emphasizing that he showed no signs of aggression. Detectives suspected Chris's affair with Tara was a strong motive for the murders, but their initial investigation found insufficient evidence to press charges. After 6 hours of questioning, Chris was released without charges. Tara was identified as a person of interest in the murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin. However, detectives cleared her as a suspect after determining she was in Florida on the morning of May 5, 2009, when the family was killed. The Coleman family murders led to one of the largest murder investigations in Illinois history. A task force of 25 detectives was formed to catch the killer. For 15 consecutive days, They worked 20-hour shifts, bringing in experts to assist with the case. A key focus of the task force was tracing the source of the hate-filled emails sent to Chris Coleman. Every threatening email received by Joyce Meyer Ministries in the past year was carefully analyzed, leading the team to locations across the country. Each person who emailed Joyce Meyer was tracked down and interviewed, but none of the individuals who sent those threats seemed to be responsible for the Coleman family's murder. A computer forensic team was called in to investigate the murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin. The detectives wanted to find any digital clues related to the crime, so they began by analyzing the email account, diarist@gmail.com. Their analysis revealed that the email address was created on November 14, 2008, just days before the first email was sent. One of the most significant discoveries made by the team was that the death threats sent to Chris Coleman's family had originated from the same IP address associated with Chris himself. The detectives continued their investigation into the Coleman family's murder by conducting a thorough examination of both the spray-painted messages found at the crime scene and Christopher Coleman's handwriting to gather evidence. They took photographs of the spray-painted messages at the crime scene and collected samples of Christopher Coleman's handwriting. These samples were then sent to a handwriting expert for analysis. After comparing the two samples, the expert concluded that the handwriting matched the spray-painted messages. This finding led the detectives to conclude that Christopher Coleman was the one who wrote the messages on the walls of his home on the day of the murders. A chemical analysis of the spray paint used at the crime scene identified the brand and color as Rust-Oleum Candy Apple Red. Investigators learned that Chris Coleman had bought this exact product at a local hardware store just days before his family was killed. One detective contacted the store manager, who confirmed the purchase and identified the specific product as Rust-Oleum Candy Apple Red spray paint. This crucial discovery linked Chris Coleman to the same type of spray paint found at the murder scene. During the investigation into the Coleman family's murder, the time of death became a crucial factor. Initially, Chris claimed to have left his home around 5:45 a.m. on May 5, 2009, the morning his family was killed. However, the medical examiner's report showed that Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin were killed around 3 a.m., indicating that Chris was at home when his family was murdered. 2 weeks after the bodies were discovered, Chris Coleman was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution's argument was that the murders were motivated by greed, selfishness, and narcissism, and that Chris had decided to eliminate his family to start anew. In April 2011, Chris Coleman's trial began, with the state accusing him of murdering his wife, Sherry, and their 2 sons, Garrett and Gavin. The prosecution's case was that Chris had killed his family because he wanted to be with Tara Lynn, but couldn't divorce his wife due to the potential loss of his well-paying job with Joyce Meyer Ministries, which did not condone divorce. Conversely, Chris's defense attorney argued that Chris was innocent and that an intruder had entered the home on May 5, 2009, and committed the murders. Exactly 2 years after the devastating murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin, Chris Coleman was finally found guilty of the heinous crime. Although eligible for the death penalty, the judge instead sentenced Chris to life imprisonment without parole. This verdict was influenced by the state of Illinois' recent repeal of the death penalty, which was set to take effect just months after the tragic incident. Sherry's loved ones and friends were resolute in keeping her, Garrett, and Gavin's memories alive, and sought to do something meaningful to honor them. They decided to raise funds for victims of domestic violence, a cause that deeply resonated with them. The case of Adrienne Jones. In 1995, 16-year-old Adrienne Jessica Jones was a junior at Mansfield High School, where she instantly became a beloved figure on campus. Her classmates and teachers admired her kindness, intelligence, and infectious spirit. Academically, Adrienne thrived, consistently excelling in the classroom and taking advanced honors courses that challenged her to excel. To ensure her success, she dedicated at least 2 hours to studying each night, and her hard work paid off with consistently high grades. After graduating from Mansfield High School, Adrienne had big plans to become a veterinarian and help animals. In addition to excelling academically, Adrienne was also an impressive athlete. She was a member of the girls' soccer team, demonstrating remarkable skill and dedication on the field. However, an unfortunate injury during a game forced her to temporarily withdraw from the team. Instead of losing her passion for sports, she joined the girls' cross-country team, which allowed her to maintain an active lifestyle and get into better shape. Adrienne Jessica Jones rose to the challenge and worked relentlessly to enhance her physical fitness. Through her unwavering determination and commitment, she rapidly established herself as a vital member of the cross-country team. Simultaneously, Adrienne navigated her academic pursuits and athletic endeavors while maintaining a considerable workload outside of the classroom, clocking 20 hours a week at Golden Fried Chicken, a local fast food restaurant. Adrienne reveled in the attention she received, particularly from the teenage boys in Mansfield, and one of her closest friends affectionately referred to her as a big flirt. She devoted at least 2 hours daily to meticulously applying her makeup, ensuring she looked flawless. Like most teenagers, Adrienne pushed against her parents' rules. Despite her kind heart, she had 2 younger brothers, and her parents were especially cautious about her safety, since Mansfield was going through changes and crime was on the rise in the area. To protect her, her parents set a strict weekend curfew of just after 9 p.m. If Adrienne wanted to go out, she had to tell her parents her plans, such as visiting a theme park or watching a movie, and provide a ticket stub as proof. To prevent her from sneaking out, Adrienne's father even nailed her bedroom window shut. On Sunday, December 3rd, 1995, Adrienne's parents made an exception and let her stay up late so she could talk to her boyfriend, Tracy Smith, on the phone. Tracy was away with his parents for the weekend, but Adrienne really wanted to catch up with him. During the call, Adrienne's mother overheard her mention that another call was coming in. When her mother asked who it was, Adrienne said it was David, a teammate from her cross-country team, and that he seemed upset about something. The morning after Adrienne went missing, her family woke up and got ready for work as they normally would. But Adrienne's mother became worried when she heard Adrienne's alarm still going off in her bedroom. She went to check on her because it was unusual for Adrienne not to turn off her alarm. When she entered the bedroom, she didn't find Adrienne, and the bed was still made, suggesting that no one had slept in it the previous night. Adrienne's mother tried to stay calm, realizing her 16-year-old daughter was missing. She briefly thought Adrienne might have gone for a morning run, but this idea was quickly dismissed when she saw Adrienne's running shoes on the bedroom floor. Although Adrienne had sneaked out at night to meet friends before, she had never stayed out all night. This worried her mother, who contacted the police with her father, concerned about Adrienne's safety. Unbeknownst to them, a man on his farm miles away had just made a disturbing discovery. At approximately 7 a.m. on Seton Road in Grand Prairie, Texas, about 10 miles from Mansfield, a man made a disturbing discovery while walking to his mailbox. Noticing his property's gate had been knocked down, he went onto the farm to investigate. There, he was met with an unexpected and alarming sight. Initially, he thought the lump on the ground was roadkill, but as he got closer, he realized it was much more sinister: the lifeless body of a deceased teenage girl. The man immediately called the police after finding the body on the farmland. When they arrived, they were met with a chilling sight. The teenager had suffered 2 gunshot wounds, one to her left cheek and one to her forehead, indicative of an execution-style killing. Furthermore, the police observed severe head injuries in addition to the gunshot wounds. The teenager's arms and legs were also covered in scrapes and bruises, a result of her desperate attempt to escape through the barbed wire gate at the front of the farm. She had clearly fought for her life. Even more disturbingly, the murdered teenager was found dressed in night clothes, implying she had been preparing for bed when her life was tragically cut short. The officers suspected a possible link to gang violence or drug activity, given the execution-style nature of the killing. Following the discovery of the girl's body on the farm, the Grand Prairie Police took swift action and sent out a teletype to all nearby agencies. This teletype included a basic description of the victim, including her approximate age, height, weight, and other physical characteristics. The aim was to share this information and raise awareness, hoping another agency might have a missing person matching the Grand Prairie victim. It wasn't long before the Mansfield police got in touch with the Grand Prairie officers. Through their investigation, the Mansfield police were able to identify the murdered teenager as Adrienne Jones. After identifying the deceased teenager as Adrienne, the police then had to notify her worried parents about the tragic turn of events. When Adrienne's mother was notified of her daughter's death by the police, she was devastated. As news of the murder spread quickly through the small town of Mansfield, Adrienne's classmates and friends at Mansfield High School were shocked and grief-stricken. Classes were disrupted, and students comforted each other as they struggled to come to terms with the loss of their peer. The town of Mansfield was on high alert following the gruesome discovery of Adrienne Jones's body in a field. Rumors and theories circulated about the possible circumstances surrounding her tragic death, with some speculating that she might have been involved in the drug trade. Others wondered if a serial killer was hiding in their community. Adrienne's parents cooperated with the police investigation, providing crucial information about their daughter's final hours. Her mother recalled a phone conversation Adrienne had with her boyfriend, Tracy, and another teenager, David, who joined the call. Additionally, one of Adrienne's younger brothers reported hearing a car engine outside their house around midnight, and upon investigation, he saw a pickup truck speeding away from the scene. The police were determined to identify the mysterious David who had called Adrienne on the night of her murder as part of their efforts to gather more information. To this end, they turned to Adrienne's cross-country coach, who revealed that one of the team members was a boy named David Graham. However, the coach was surprised to learn that David would have been calling Adrienne, as she had never observed any interactions between the two. David Graham was a driven teenager with big aspirations. After watching his first air show at 7, he set his sights on becoming an Air Force pilot. A popular student at Mansfield High, David charmed his peers, especially girls, but saved his heart for Diane Zamora, a high-achieving senior who shared his military dreams. Following Adrienne's murder, the police interviewed David Graham, who acknowledged knowing Adrienne from their time on the cross-country team, but claimed their relationship never went beyond a casual acquaintance. When questioned about contacting Adrienne on the night of her death, David vehemently denied any involvement, stating he was at home studying with his girlfriend, Diane Zamora, at the time. The police thoroughly investigated David as a potential suspect in Adrienne's murder. As part of this effort, they reached out to Adrienne's friends to determine if she had ever mentioned David. One of Adrienne's closest friends revealed that she was privy to Adrienne's deepest secrets, but had never discussed David. Furthermore, when the police examined Adrienne's phone book, they found that David's number was not listed. This discovery reinforced the police's belief that David was not involved in Adrienne's murder, and as a result, they never even considered administering a polygraph test to him. Ultimately, the police cleared David of suspicion and removed him from their list of suspects. After David, the police suspected Adrienne's boyfriend, Tracy Smith, in connection with her murder. However, they quickly cleared him when they confirmed his alibi. He was out of town with his family on the night of the murder. Moreover, Tracy passed a polygraph examination, further solidifying his innocence. During the police interview, Tracy mentioned a person who he thought should be investigated in relation to Adrian's murder. He told them that Adrian had informed him about a guy named Brian who had called while they were on the phone on the night of her murder. The police launched an investigation into Brian's identity and discovered that he was a local teenager named Brian McMillian. While investigating Brian, the police made a significant discovery. They found out that Brian used to work at a pharmacy near a restaurant where Adrian previously worked and had become infatuated with her. Brian often visited the restaurant to catch a glimpse of Adrian, but she grew tired of his constant presence and began hiding in the back whenever she saw him coming. The police questioned Brian McMillian about the murder of Adrian Jones. At first, he claimed to know nothing about her. However, during the interview, Brian later admitted to knowing Adrian. When an officer asked if he had spoken to Adrian on the night she was murdered, Brian said he couldn't remember. According to Brian, he was drinking on the night of the murder because he was feeling depressed and lonely. When an officer asked if he had visited Adrian's house the night she was killed, Brian said he might have done so. At the end of the interview, the police asked Brian's father if he would allow Brian to take a polygraph test, but his father refused. 1 week after the interview, the police raided Brian's house armed with guns because they were unsure if he might be armed during the arrest. This decision was made to ensure the safety of everyone involved, as the police suspected Brian might have a weapon. After Brian's arrest for Adrian's murder, many people came forward to express their support for him. His friends described him as a gentle and non-violent person. Moreover, Brian's father confirmed that his son was at home all night when Adrian was killed and did not leave the house. Brian spent 3 weeks in jail, missing Christmas and New Year's, while awaiting further investigation and legal proceedings. During this time, the district attorney's office arranged for Brian to take a polygraph test, which he passed convincingly. With this outcome, the district attorney's office was left with little evidence to link Brian to Adrian's murder, and as a result, they released him from custody. 9 months into the Adrian murder probe, Mansfield, Texas police got a break from Annapolis, Maryland, where Diane Zamora was at the Naval Academy. Officers said she confessed to fellow cadets that she and boyfriend David Graham killed Adrian Jones in Mansfield. Mansfield police went to Annapolis to interview Diane, who denied making the admission. Despite this, the Naval Academy suspended her pending investigation. The police, unable to get information from Diane, went to Colorado Springs, Colorado, to question David Graham at the Air Force Academy. When they interviewed David, he initially claimed to have no idea why Diane would fabricate a story about killing Adrian Jones. However, as the interview progressed, David began to show signs of nervousness and requested to write a statement. In a detailed 4.5-page confession letter, David revealed how he and his girlfriend Diane had planned and carried out the murder of Adrian Jones. In the letter, David described a specific incident in November 1995 where he offered to drive Adrian home, during which they stopped at an elementary school parking lot and had sexual intercourse. David confessed that he felt overwhelming guilt after this encounter, as he deeply loved his girlfriend Diane and knew his actions would cause her immense pain. One evening, while David was helping Diane study for her SATs, a heated argument broke out between them. Overwhelmed with guilt, David finally confessed to being unfaithful, breaking down in tears as he sat on the couch and revealed to Diane that he had not remained faithful to her. He then detailed his encounter with Adrian. After David confessed to his infidelity with Adrian, Diane was devastated. The betrayal left her heart shattered, feeling hurt and enraged. Her anger boiled over, and she lashed out at David, arguing and screaming at him, even wishing he were dead and harboring intense hatred towards Adrian. Diane's emotions were overwhelming, and she struggled to come to terms with what had happened. David admitted that he promised Diane he would do whatever it took to salvage their relationship. He claimed that he and Diane came to the conclusion that the only way to restore their love was to take drastic action: murder Adrian Jones. David wrote in his confession letter that on December 3rd, he called Adrian Jones and asked her to secretly meet him late at night. He made her promise not to tell anyone about their meeting. Initially, David planned to get Adrian alone, attack her, and then dispose of her body in a lake at 2:30 a.m. David picked up Adrian in his car, with Diane hiding in the hatchback. When they reached a secluded spot 10 miles out of town, David turned off the highway onto Satan Road. He stopped the car, and Adrian slightly adjusted her seat, making it seem like they were about to be intimate. However, David had secretly signaled for Diane to come out. Diane emerged from the trunk and walked around to the front of the car. As she approached, she confronted Adrian, who was seated in the passenger seat. Diane then hit Adrian in the head with a weight from David's gym set. Despite being severely injured, Adrian didn't die. Amazingly, Adrian managed to crawl out of the car window and escape. David and Diane were in a state of panic, prompting David to grab his 9mm Makarov weapon and chase after Adrian. Due to her severe head wound, Adrian didn't get far and collapsed in a nearby field. When David caught up to her, he shot her twice before returning to his car. After Adrian's death, the first words exchanged between Diane and David were, "I love you." Following David's confession to murdering Adrian, the police returned to question Diane, who had a confession of her own. As a result, David and Diane were arrested and charged with capital murder. However, both later retracted their confessions. David claimed that Diane was the sole perpetrator, while Diane alleged that David acted alone. In 1998, Adrian's mother submitted a petition to the court, requesting that the death penalty be removed as an option for David and Diane. Diane's trial started in February of that year. In court, several witnesses stated that Diane showed no remorse for murdering Adrian Jones. After deliberating, the jury delivered a guilty verdict on February 17th, convicting Diane of capital murder. As a result, Diane was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole in 40 years. Similarly, David Graham was also found guilty of Adrian Jones's murder and received a life sentence with parole eligibility in 40 years. The case of Jonathan Hoffman. Jonathan Hoffman was born in Michigan in 1994 to Jennifer and Michael Hoffman. His sister Jessica was born 3 years later, and from a very young age, the two siblings formed an unbreakable bond and shared a special connection that would last a lifetime. However, Jonathan's parents, Jennifer and Michael, faced significant struggles in their marriage, and their frequent fights often forced them to leave Jonathan and Jessica in the care of their grandmother, Sandra. Sandra, Jennifer's mother, played a crucial role in the lives of her grandchildren, providing a safe, loving, and nurturing environment for them. The children cherished the time they spent with their grandmother, who offered them a sense of stability in an otherwise tumultuous upbringing. In 2008, after years of turmoil, Jennifer and Michael divorced when Jonathan was a senior at Farmington Central High School. Following the divorce, Jennifer made the difficult decision to relocate the family from Michigan to Arizona. This move was particularly hard for Jonathan, who was forced to leave behind the only life he had ever known, including his friends, familiar surroundings, and the comfort of his childhood home. The situation rapidly deteriorated for Jonathan and his family after they moved to Arizona. Not long after their relocation, his younger sister Jessica fell critically ill. Medical tests revealed a tumor in her brain, prompting urgent surgery to remove it the very next day. Although the operation was a success, it entailed a lengthy convalescence, and Jessica spent an entire month recovering in the hospital. Throughout this period, Jennifer dedicated herself fully to her daughter's recovery, neglecting her own needs in the process. This left Jonathan feeling abandoned and lonely, forced to navigate the challenges of adolescence in a new state without the emotional support of his mother and sister. Recognizing the strain Jonathan was under, his grandmother Sandra reached out to Jennifer, deeply concerned about her grandson's well-being. Believing familiar surroundings and old friends would bring Jonathan solace, Sandra suggested he return to Michigan to live with her and her husband, Fred. Jennifer worried whether her 74-year-old mother would be capable of caring for him, but Sandra reassured her that she was more than capable. 1 month after the Hoffman family's move to Arizona, Jonathan returned to Michigan and moved in with Sandra and Fred. The homecoming brought Jonathan immense joy and relief midway through his senior year of high school. Thrilled to be back among friends and family, he felt a sense of comfort and belonging he had missed in Arizona. His friends recall that Jonathan was initially shy, but once he opened up, he was a lot of fun and loved to make people laugh. With a zest for adventure, he was always up for trying new things. Although Jennifer deeply missed her son, she embarked on the journey to Michigan to spend 2 weeks with him. During her visit, she was dismayed to discover that Jonathan had been smoking marijuana. However, Jennifer viewed this as a typical phase of teenage experimentation and was confident it didn't involve harder substances. With a heavy heart, Jennifer bid farewell to Jonathan, confident that he would be in good hands with his grandmother. But little did she know, Jonathan was in grave peril, and it was at the hands of his grandmother, Sandra. On May 19, 2017, at 5:27 p.m., Jonathan Hoffman made a frantic 911 call, his voice trembling as he relayed to the dispatcher that his grandmother had shot him and he was dying. The dispatcher sprang into action, swiftly dispatching police and paramedics to Jonathan's residence. As she spoke to him, she tried to reassure him that help was on the way, her voice steady amidst the chaos and fear in his. Suddenly, an ominous silence fell on the line, and for a moment, the dispatcher feared the connection had been dropped, or worse, that Jonathan had succumbed to his injuries. But then, just as her heart sank, she heard a barrage of gunfire erupt from the phone, followed by a pained cry. Jonathan yelled, "Ow!" as his voice cracked with terror, telling the operator that his grandmother had shot him again. The West Bloomfield Township Police Department officers responded swiftly to the scene, arriving at Sandra Lane's house at 5:33 p.m. As they approached, the sound of gunfire echoed from within the residence. Trained to handle such situations, the officers didn't hesitate, taking necessary precautions to ensure their safety. They positioned themselves behind their patrol vehicles, using them as cover from their vantage point. Observing a woman moving inside the house, they issued clear, direct commands, ordering the individual to put their weapon on the ground. After a tense moment, the officers heard the sound of a gun being secured, and with the assurance that the person inside had put the firearm away, they entered the residence. When the police made it inside the home, they found 74-year-old Sandra Lane standing before them, a Glock 17 .40 caliber handgun at her feet. Sandra repeated several times in an eerily calm tone that she had murdered her grandson, stating the disturbing sentiment as fact. One of the police officers asked Sandra why she had killed her grandson, but she remained silent, offering no explanation. 2 minutes after the police arrived, Sandra was handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol vehicle. Officers entered her home to find the victim, whom Sandra claimed was her grandson, 17-year-old Jonathan Hoffman. Inside the home, the air was thick with smoke, making it difficult to see through the haze as they ascended the staircase. They reached the landing where Jonathan lay motionless, face down on the hardwood floor, dressed in gym shorts and socks. The young man's body was riddled with gunshot wounds to his upper torso. Despite the severity of his condition, the medics managed to detect a faint pulse. With urgency, Jonathan was rushed to Botsford Hospital, where a team of medical professionals worked tirelessly to stabilize his condition. However, their efforts ultimately proved futile, and after 30 minutes of intense medical intervention, he was pronounced dead. After the ambulance rushed Jonathan Hoffman to the hospital, police secured Sandra Lane's home as a crime scene. The 3-level residence was a labyrinth of violence and blood, with nearly every room telling a grim tale. Crime scene investigators arrived, meticulously combing the area for clues to unravel the shocking events. As they descended the basement staircase, they were struck by footprints in the blood-stained floor, crucial evidence carefully preserved. Deeper in the house, the team found 10 bullet casings scattered throughout, each one collected and analyzed. One investigator discovered a bullet hole in the drywall, and the search for more evidence led them to the second floor, where a gun case filled with ammunition was found. While gathering evidence, investigators took extra care to photograph Sandra, capturing her face, arms, and hands as she sat in the patrol car. Sandra became overwhelmed, tears streaming down her face. Amidst the chaos, Fred Lane, Sandra's husband, appeared outside the house with their dog, claiming to have been gone for an hour, a walk he took after Sandra asked him to. Fred was stunned to discover that his wife, Sandra Lane, had confessed to shooting and killing their grandson Jonathan after he was pronounced dead at the hospital. The police faced the daunting task of breaking the news to Jonathan's family that their beloved son had been murdered by his own grandmother. As detectives dug deeper into the case, they learned that Jonathan had been living in Michigan, separated from his parents and sister who resided in Arizona. When the detectives shared the devastating news with Jennifer, informing her that her mother had taken the life of her cherished son, she was left in a state of utter disbelief. It seemed unbelievable that someone who was supposed to love and care for their grandchildren could commit such an atrocity. The fact that Jonathan was his grandmother's favorite made the tragedy even more incomprehensible, leaving everyone wondering how he met his end at Sandra's hands. As the day drew to a close, around 7:30 p.m., the police decided to take Sandra Lane to the hospital for a health evaluation, given her advanced age. While waiting in the emergency room, Sandra maintained that Jonathan had never harmed her, describing him as a kind boy who never hurt anyone. After a medical assessment, the doctors cleared Sandra of any suspicious injuries. With this, the police decided to return her to the patrol car and take her to the police department for further questioning. On May 20th, after midnight, Sandra's attorney met her at the police station before she provided her official statement to the police. Seated alongside her attorney, Sandra sought legal counsel when the detectives eventually met with them. Sandra's story took a dramatic turn at the police station. Contradicting her initial statement at the hospital, where she had claimed her grandson was not involved, she now alleged that she and Jonathan had engaged in a heated altercation involving yelling and screaming. During this confrontation, Jonathan had kicked her in the stomach, leaving her fearing for her life. According to Sandra, Jonathan's behavior had become increasingly erratic and angry of late. He would come and go from her house at all hours, frequently bringing over people she didn't care for. Furthermore, Sandra had noticed that valuables had gone missing from her home, leading her to suspect that Jonathan or his friends might be involved in theft. Sandra also mentioned that her grandson had a history of run-ins with the law. Sandra stated that Jonathan was pulled over by an officer while driving, and cannabis was found in his car. However, this didn't deter him, and he was stopped again by an officer shortly after. This time, he was found to be in possession of Adderall. Sandra also recalled an incident where she had to call 911 due to Jonathan's aggressive behavior. During that episode, he was yelling obscene remarks at her. Despite this, when the police arrived, Sandra persuaded them not to arrest him. According to Sandra, she was compelled to buy a gun due to Jonathan's behavior. Sandra alleged that everything escalated on May 18th when she accompanied Jonathan to the probation department due to his non-compliance with his probation terms. After returning home, Sandra stated that Jonathan threatened to take her car, which led to him attacking her. Since there were no witnesses to Jonathan's shooting apart from Sandra, the detectives faced a significant challenge in verifying her account. Sandra claimed self-defense, prompting the detectives to conduct a thorough investigation into the incident. Their primary concern was ensuring they didn't wrongfully send a 74-year-old frail grandmother to prison for defending herself against a violent teenage boy. The detectives examined the photo taken by crime scene investigators immediately after Sandra confessed to shooting Jonathan. However, upon reviewing the evidence, they found no signs of violence on Sandra, not a single scratch, which would be expected if she had indeed been in a physical struggle. During her court arraignment, the judge ruled that Sandra should be held on bond while awaiting trial at the correctional facility. Paul Walton, the prosecutor on the case, believed the 911 call made by Jonathan clashed with Sandra's self-defense claim. Upon listening to the call, Walton noticed a significant 2-minute and 51-second silence before Sandra fired another shot at Jonathan. Based on his observations, it seemed clear that Jonathan was already severely injured and no longer posed an immediate threat to Sandra. However, Sandra's defense team presented a contrasting argument. They countered that Jonathan still posed a threat despite his injuries. The defense highlighted a portion of the 911 call where Sandra yells, "Let go," implying that Jonathan was still attacking his grandmother, even in his injured state. The defense argued that Sandra was simply an innocent and loving grandmother. They pointed to the end of the 911 call, where Sandra can be heard instructing her bleeding grandson to lie down and promising to get him water as proof of her compassionate nature. According to the defense, these statements revealed Sandra's true character as a caring and empathetic woman. Prosecutor Walton was perplexed by Sandra Lane. Was she a doting grandmother forced to make the ultimate sacrifice in a desperate situation, or a ruthless killer who stalked her own grandson, callously ending his life in the woods? To uncover the truth, Prosecutor Walton conducted a series of interviews around town. The testimonies uniformly portrayed Sandra as an ordinary, kind-hearted grandmother. She regularly visited the local salon, actively participated in her synagogue, taught Sunday school, and volunteered her time. Her generosity and affluence were also well known. What struck the detectives most was the resoundingly positive feedback from those who knew Sandra. They described her as deeply devoted to her grandchildren, particularly Jonathan. The testimony seemed to starkly contradict the heinous act she had confessed to committing. However, a different narrative unfolded when the detectives spoke with Jennifer, Sandra's daughter, and Jonathan's mother. Jennifer offered a contrasting perspective on her mother's character, contradicting the image projected by the community. She described her mother as a controlling and abusive figure, vastly different from the warm and compassionate person others had portrayed. According to Jennifer, her childhood was marked by constant parental fighting, with her mother physically assaulting her on multiple occasions. Her father's frequent absences left Sandra in complete control of the household, allowing her to behave like a tyrant, prone to violent outbursts. Years later, when Sandra remarried Fred Lane, Jennifer witnessed a significant shift in her mother's behavior. Sandra expressed deep affection for Fred, believing him to be a stabilizing influence in their home. Initially, her controlling nature seemed to subside. However, after Jennifer gave birth to Jonathan, Sandra allegedly attempted to reassert her dominance. Jennifer claimed that her mother's obsession with the baby bordered on an unhealthy level, with Sandra becoming so fixated that Jennifer jokingly wondered if she wanted to kidnap the child. After Sandra was charged with murdering her grandson Jonathan, the community of West Bloomfield surprisingly rallied around her. A significant number of residents believed Jonathan was a drug user who got what was coming to him, sparking a wave of support for Sandra. On social media, community members posted messages of encouragement, affectionately referring to her as Granny and using the hashtag #GoGrannyGo. In this narrative, Jonathan was vilified as a monster, while Sandra was portrayed as an innocent, frail, elderly woman. Jennifer revealed that most of her family had bought into Sandra's self-defense story, effectively disowning both Jonathan's memory and herself. Throughout the ordeal, Sandra's husband Fred stood by her side, offering unconditional support. The medical examiner concluded that Jonathan Hoffman's death was a homicide resulting from the multiple gunshot wounds he suffered. An examination of the wounds revealed stippling, indicating that the gun was fired from varying distances. Additionally, a toxicology report revealed the presence of synthetic marijuana, also known as spice, or specifically K2, in Jonathan's system. At the time, spice was widely available in West Bloomfield, particularly among teens and young adults, who could purchase it at gas stations without identification. There were numerous reports of individuals experiencing adverse reactions to the substance, including violent behavior after consumption. 1 month prior to Jonathan's death, a disturbingly similar incident occurred involving another student from the same high school. Michael Cipriano, a classmate of Jonathan's, murdered his father, Robert, after a heated verbal argument. According to reports, Michael was under the influence of the synthetic drug spice at the time of the attack. Jonathan's sister, Jessica, harbored a deep affection for her brother, but she was also aware of his emotional instability and occasional violent outbursts. Despite her reluctance to consider it, she couldn't shake the suspicion that her brother might have harmed their grandmother, leading her to ultimately shoot and kill him. 2 months after her arrest, Sandra was arraigned in circuit court and indicted on 2 additional charges: possession of a firearm and committing a felony. Furthermore, she faced a distinctive charge known as open murder, which is only applicable in select states such as Nevada and Michigan. This unique charge encompasses both first and second-degree murder. Prosecutor Paul Walton was concerned that the jury might hesitate to convict a grandmother of premeditated murder, so he opted to present the jury with a broader range of options. This decision displeased the defense, who felt that the prosecution was shirking their responsibility. In 2013, Sandra Lane faced trial for the murder of her grandson, sparking widespread national outrage. Many directed blame at the boy's mother, Jennifer, for sending him to Michigan to stay with Sandra. Throughout the trial, the defense portrayed Sandra as a devoted and loving grandmother, but the prosecution disputed her claim of self-defense. They presented telling images of Sandra taken after the shooting, highlighting inconsistencies. Her clothes remained unripped, her jewelry was still intact, and her hair was styled as usual. Moreover, bloody footprints found in the basement, matching Sandra's shoes, implied that she had searched for additional ammunition. After the prosecution rested its case, Sandra's defense team presented their argument to bolster their stance. Sandra's attorney took a calculated risk by allowing her to testify on her own behalf. The attorney believed it was crucial for the jury to hear directly from Sandra herself, giving a first-hand account of the experiences she had while living with her grandson Jonathan in the months leading up to his tragic death. According to Sandra, Jonathan had a history of violent outbursts, often kicking in doors and breaking objects. On one occasion, he even shattered a computer monitor. On the day of the incident that ultimately led to Jonathan's death, Sandra alleged that he struck her in the head, leaving her feeling threatened and terrified. As a result, she decided to retrieve her gun, hoping it would serve as a deterrent to protect herself. Her intention, as stated in her testimony, was not to take her grandson's life, but rather to stop him from getting back up and attacking her again. However, during cross-examination by prosecutor Paul Walton, Sandra's account began to unravel. Under Walton's pressure, Sandra conceded that her motivation for obtaining the gun was not fear for her safety, but rather a desire to get Jonathan to listen to her. This admission severely undermined her credibility as a witness and made it increasingly difficult to argue self-defense. Experts testified that the K2 spice found in Jonathan's urine at the time of his death suggested he was not under the influence of the drug when he died. The presence of the drug in his urine indicated that it had already been metabolized, casting doubt on Sandra's claim that Jonathan was high on the drug and violent. After hearing the evidence presented at the trial, the jury deliberated for 2 days before returning a guilty verdict for second-degree murder and the use of a firearm during the commission of a felony. Sandra was subsequently sentenced to 20 years in prison. The case of Rebecca Bleefnick. Becky and Tim first met while they were students at Quincy University. Becky was studying biology and was also a talented tennis player, whereas Tim made a name for himself as a standout football player, earning all-star status. People who knew Tim well would often describe him as a fun-loving and playful guy who always greeted others with a warm hug. His lively personality and infectious energy made him extremely popular among his peers. On the other hand, Becky's friends would often say that she was a happy and vibrant person who could light up a room just by being there. Her positive attitude and bright smile made her instantly likable and approachable. Given that Becky and Tim were both attractive individuals, they seemed to be a perfect match for each other. Their physical appearance and chemistry together made them appear like the ideal couple. 2 years after graduating from Quincy University, Becky and Tim decided to start a new chapter in their lives by getting married. As a practical couple, they prioritized saving money over unnecessary expenses. Instead of buying Becky an expensive engagement ring, Tim decided to put their savings towards a down payment on their first home. They also opted for a more low-key honeymoon, choosing to invest their money in their future together rather than splurging on lavish celebrations. Becky wanted to be a doctor, but opted out to focus on motherhood. She craved the joy and fulfillment that came with raising kids. Her dream came true with 3 sons, bringing her immense joy and treasured moments. As the boys grew older, Becky decided to pursue her own goals and aspirations. She went back to school to earn a nursing degree. Tim, who had a talent for entertaining, had performed in community theater in Quincy and created humorous videos on social media. In 2008, he tried out for American Gladiators, making it to the final round of auditions. In September 2019, he got another chance to showcase his talent when the producers of Family Feud invited him and his family to participate in the show. However, Becky was unable to join him due to her nursing school commitments. Tim then gathered his family, including his parents and brothers, to take advantage of the opportunity. Tim's family, the Biancs, appeared on Family Feud for 3 episodes and won a total of $20,000. They divided the money equally among themselves, but Tim did not share his winnings with his wife Becky. Becky and Tim's marriage had been struggling for a while, particularly when Becky decided to become a nurse. Tim was against this career choice, claiming he was worried about the stress it would bring Becky. He said she already had trouble managing her patients and stress levels when dealing with their kids, and he wondered if she could handle the demands of the job. However, Becky's friends saw Tim's opposition differently. They thought he was uncomfortable with Becky being independent and doing things outside of his control. As time went on, Becky's friends noticed she was becoming increasingly unhappy in her marriage. While the first 5 years had been relatively positive, Tim's behavior had become more controlling and manipulative. Becky's friends observed that she was shouldering the bulk of the household responsibilities, in addition to her demanding nursing studies and job, while Tim did not pull his weight. He rarely lifted a finger to clean or care for their children, leaving Becky to handle everything on her own after her long nursing shifts. As Becky recognized the growing tensions in their marriage, she felt compelled to discuss the issue with Tim. She believed that attending marriage counseling could help them identify solutions and restore harmony to their relationship. However, Tim refused to consider counseling, which disappointed Becky. Despite Becky's efforts to address the problems in their marriage, Tim filed for divorce in January 2021 after 11 years of marriage. This caught Becky off guard, as she had demonstrated her commitment to saving their marriage. Tim claimed that the reason for his decision was a perceived change in Becky's personality after she became a nurse, which he believed had negatively impacted their marriage. Tim and Becky's divorce was extremely contentious. The couple found it difficult to agree on anything and stopped communicating effectively. They disagreed on several key issues, including who would get custody of the children, how to divide their property, and how much alimony would be paid. From Tim's perspective, the situation was already volatile. He even went so far as to request a restraining order against Becky, citing a specific incident where she became aggressive during a heated argument at a parent-teacher conference. However, Becky had a different viewpoint. She alleged that Tim was harassing her and confided in her friends through text messages. In these messages, she described several disturbing incidents, including Tim yelling at her, pushing her in front of their sons, and throwing objects across the room. Becky's anxiety was fueled by her fear that Tim might take drastic action to keep her away from their children. After a coworker was tragically murdered by her partner, Becky became increasingly concerned about her own safety, believing that Tim was capable of harming her in a similar way. Becky's sister was concerned about her sister's safety, so she encouraged Becky to seek help at a domestic violence resource center. After some time, Becky made the decision to file a restraining order against Tim, alleging that he had entered her home without her permission and had lied about their interactions. When a judge reviewed the competing orders of protection filed by Tim and Becky, he ruled against granting either of them. Instead, he ordered the two to maintain a safe distance from each other's homes, with the exception of when they exchanged custody of their children. However, in February 2023, Tim reached out to the Quincy Police Department, informing them that he refused to return a gun, citing his reluctance to hand it over to that crazy person, a clear reference to Becky. Becky and Tim were getting divorced, and it was going to be finalized in a week. At that time, their 3 sons, aged 12, 10, and 5, were staying at Tim's house, which was just a mile away from Becky's home. The next day, Tim contacted Becky's father, saying he couldn't reach Becky and that she had not picked the boys up from school as planned. Becky's father was worried because he knew how dedicated Becky was as a mother. He thought something must have happened to prevent her from taking care of her responsibilities. Concerned about Becky's well-being, her father drove to her house and went inside, calling out her name. But there was no response. He went upstairs to her bedroom and found a shocking and disturbing scene. Becky was lying on her back in a pool of blood with multiple gunshot wounds. Detectives and crime scene investigators promptly responded to Becky's house after her father's disturbing discovery of her lifeless body in the bathroom, lying face up and covered in blood. Their meticulous investigation began with a thorough examination of the exterior of Becky's home, which led to a comprehensive search to identify the point of entry. The search revealed that an upstairs window in one of the children's bedrooms had been pried open, suggesting the perpetrator used a patio chair to climb up to the roof and gain access to the house. Following the suspect's likely path, investigators proceeded to Becky's bedroom, where they found signs of forced entry on the door, indicating it had been violently kicked down or broken. The state of the bedroom door implied to investigators that the suspect had burst into the room, likely in search of Becky. Evidence suggested Becky tried to hide in the bathroom, but the suspect caught up and shot her. Investigators found her phone near her body and saw a 1:11 a.m. 911 call. They believe Becky tried to call for help while being chased, but dialed wrong and was knocked to the ground before she could try again. When officers canvassed Becky's neighborhood, no one recalled hearing anything suspicious. The lack of witnesses raised suspicions, given Becky's multiple gunshot wounds. A thorough search of her house ruled out a botched burglary, as nothing was missing. Investigators found a partial shoe print, 8 9mm shell casings, and shredded plastic near the body. Despite this evidence, they were unsure what to make of it, so they sent it to forensic labs for analysis. Detectives sought neighbors' security cameras. One neighbor had a camera on their house, facing their driveway, which bordered Becky's home. It turned on with movement, but didn't catch anything on the night of her death. However, it did capture a person walking down her driveway at 1:05 a.m. the day before, and again 48 minutes later. Becky's neighbor had also caught a similar incident on camera about a week before the main event, on February 14th. When Becky's neighbors reviewed their security footage on Valentine's Day, they saw a suspicious, dark-clad figure lurking around her house. They immediately informed Becky, who became paranoid after learning about the mysterious figure. Although Becky claimed she hadn't seen anyone on her property, she had heard strange voices in her backyard the previous night, which frightened her even more considering the security footage. The police extended their search to the rest of the neighborhood, looking for more footage of the dark-clad individual. They found videos from a house near the Quincy bus barn, which showed a person dressed in dark clothing riding a bike toward Becky's house. These additional videos were consistent with the description of the mysterious person seen in the driveway footage, showing someone riding a bike while wearing dark clothing. After analyzing the recorded times of the videos, detectives became suspicious that the person on the bike was the same individual seen in the footage from Becky's driveway. Although Becky's neighbor's security camera didn't capture the mysterious person on the night of her murder, officers found footage of someone on a bike riding towards and away from Becky's house around the time of the incident. This person's appearance matched the description of the individual seen lurking in Becky's driveway in the days leading up to her murder. Video evidence helped in Becky's murder investigation, but poor quality footage limited its usefulness. The grainy image made it hard to identify the person's gender. However, detectives did note the bike lacked reflectors on its wheels. Becky's sister suspected her estranged husband Tim of murder, having witnessed their bitter divorce. She told detectives, who then investigated Tim. The timing was suspicious, as the murder occurred a week before their divorce was to be finalized. A bike without reflectors, like one seen near Tim's house on security footage, was found, increasing suspicion and leading to a search warrant for Tim's home. When the police executed the search warrant, Tim was compliant and respectful throughout the search. He willingly stood outside his home, accompanied by the officers, as investigators looked through his belongings. On March 13, 2023, 2 weeks after Becky was murdered, Tim was arrested and charged with her murder. Tim's mugshot shocked his friends and family, showing a disheveled, unkempt man. Many thought the divorce had taken a toll on his health, but Tim claimed he was growing his hair out for a cancer charity. After his bizarre response on Family Feud, saying he regretted marrying his wife, and his subsequent arrest for her murder, many saw it as a warning sign of sinister intentions. The investigators thoroughly examined Tim's phone and discovered that he had created a Facebook account under the name John Smith. Through their investigation, the detectives learned that Tim was searching for a bicycle on Facebook and found a blue Schwinn without any reflectors on the wheels. This discovery was intriguing as it matched the description of a bike found abandoned 1 block away from Tim's residence. Detectives faced a challenge when Tim was arrested, held without bond, and demanded a speedy trial. With only 90 days to build a case, prosecutors struggled to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt without a confession or DNA evidence. 3 months after Becky's murder, Tim's trial began on May 23, 2023. The prosecution presented evidence, including shredded plastic pieces found near Becky's body, which they claimed were from an Aldi grocery bag. Similar bags were found at Tim's house. The prosecutor argued Tim used the bags as a silencer when shooting Becky, and that he left DNA on them. An expert testified that Tim was likely the DNA contributor, and his DNA couldn't be excluded from under Becky's fingernails. Prosecutors presented a crowbar found in Tim's basement, suggesting it was used to pry open the victim's window. An expert confirmed similarities, but couldn't confirm it was the same crowbar. They also presented Tim's phone searches, including how to open a door with a crowbar and other incriminating queries. An expert testified that shell casings from the crime scene matched those found at Tim's house, suggesting the same 9mm gun was used. However, the gun, which Tim had refused to give back to Becky, was never found at his house. Jury delivers guilty verdict after 4-hour deliberation, sentencing Tim to life without parole. Becky's family feels justice is served, despite Tim's claims of innocence and plans to appeal. At sentencing, Becky's sister condemned Tim's actions, saying his choices hurt his sons, and vowed to keep Becky's memory alive for them. The case of Allison Bonilla. Allison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez was born on November 7, 2001, in Cartago, Costa Rica. As the only child, she lived with her single mother, Yandri Vasquez. However, Yandri wasn't alone in raising Allison. Her grandparents, Ramon and Marjorie, and Aunt Zamara often pitched in to help. Yandri revealed that Allison's father had abandoned them immediately after her birth, leaving to be with another woman who was pregnant at the time. He showed no interest in being part of Allison's life, except for one time when he reached out because he had been diagnosed with lung cancer. Allison and her mother, Yandri, had an extremely strong and supportive relationship that went beyond the usual bond between a mother and daughter. They were each other's closest confidante, providing emotional support. Allison felt completely at ease sharing her thoughts and feelings with Yandri, knowing that she would never be judged or misunderstood. Coming from a large family, Allison never felt the absence of a father figure. She cherished spending quality time with her relatives and attending church services every Sunday. Family members often described her as a kind, outgoing, and friendly individual who always radiated happiness in photographs. Allison had always dreamed of becoming a model. At a young age, she decided to drop out of 8th grade to focus on taking makeup classes, believing that balancing school with these classes would be too difficult. Modeling was her top priority, and she didn't think formal education would help her achieve her goals. However, her initial attempts to find a job to help support her mother with household expenses were unsuccessful. Seeing her daughter's disappointment, Yandri wisely suggested that Allison enroll in night school to improve her chances of getting hired. At 18, Allison took her mother's advice and registered at a local school, eventually earning a certificate in pastry making. With this new skill, she was able to create beautiful cakes and earn a steady income. Allison was in a romantic relationship with Harold Sora Solano, a resident of Cachi, a district in the Paraíso Canton, Cartago Province, Costa Rica. Her daily routine typically involved spending the morning at home with her mother. Later, she would meet Harold and then head to evening school, which started at 6 p.m. The route from the bus stop to her house passed through a hazardous area, so Allison always kept her mother informed about her whereabouts. Occasionally, her mother would meet her at a bus stop or the midpoint bridge for added safety. On March 4, 2020, Allison visited her mom's salon for a manicure and some conversation. Later, she met up with her friend Pa, whom she had attended school with, and they headed to their school together, arriving around 6 p.m. However, they parted ways as they had different classes. After spending about 15 minutes in an empty classroom, Allison discovered that her classes had been canceled that day. She then decided to visit her aunt, who lived nearby, but found that she wasn't at home. Instead, Allison opted to spend time with her boyfriend Harold, but he wasn't home either. His mother told her that he was at work and would be back soon, inviting Allison to wait for him at their house. When Harold returned, they had a big family dinner, chatting about various topics and discussing their plans. Later, Harold excused himself, saying he had an urgent matter to attend to around 8:15 p.m. and would be back soon. However, Allison left Harold's house without waiting for his return. This marked the beginning of a series of events that would soon captivate the entire country. Harold returned home about 5 minutes later, but Allison was no longer there. He texted her to ask where she was and offered to take her home on his motorcycle. Allison quickly replied that she was already at the bus stop and didn't need him to worry about her. While waiting for the bus, Allison asked her friend Pa if his cousin could give her a ride home on his bike. However, Pa's cousin refused, explaining that his bike was a professional cycling bike, not suitable for carrying two people. Despite this, Allison didn't ask her boyfriend Harold for help, possibly because she was angry with him or didn't want to trouble him. Allison took the bus home and got off at around 8:43 p.m., with her home about a mile away. Feeling uneasy, she asked her mom to meet her halfway, but before her mom could arrive, Allison texted both her boyfriend and mother at 8:45 p.m. to warn them that two suspicious men were following her. They had gotten off the bus at the same stop as her, so Allison decided to run home to lose them. The road Allison had planned to run along was notorious for being hazardous, with very little lighting and hardly any pedestrians around. Although the only surveillance camera in the area captured a blurred image of someone believed to be Allison, it didn't provide much clarity. Concerned, her mother Yandri waited for her at the bridge, about half a mile from their home, but Allison never showed up. Trying to stay calm, Yandri thought maybe Allison had returned to the bus stop as a precaution and went to check, but she wasn't there either. Assuming Allison might have missed her and was already home, Yandri returned, only to find their house empty. Yandri then started calling family members and Allison's friends, asking if they had seen her and requesting their help in the search. About 30 minutes later, Harold received a call from Allison's aunt, Zomar, informing him that Allison was missing. He immediately tried calling Allison, but her phone was unreachable. 3 hours later, Allison was officially reported missing, and her mother contacted the police. Yandri was able to provide a detailed description of Allison's outfit, as Allison had asked her to take a photo of her earlier that day, the last known image of Allison at the start of the investigation. The police conducted a thorough search from the bus stop to Allison's house, extending it to nearby locations, including Lake Catchy and the hydroelectric dam. On March 5, 2020, the police made their first breakthrough in the case when they found Allison's glasses lying in the grass, nearly a mile from her home. However, despite this discovery, there was still no sign of Allison herself. 8 days later, the police made a surprising discovery when they stumbled upon Allison Billa's identification on a coffee plantation, an area they had already thoroughly searched multiple times. What raised suspicions was that the ID was found in a conspicuous location, making it hard to miss, and it showed no signs of dirt or wear, suggesting that someone might have deliberately placed it there to mislead the investigation or conceal important details. 15 days after Allison's disappearance, Yandri received a disturbing call from Allison's father. Instead of offering support or assistance, he shockingly blamed Allison's beauty for her disappearance. Yandri was taken aback by his insensitive words and immediately hung up, struggling to process what she had just heard. After some time passed, Allison's family, the police, and volunteers persisted in their search for her. Every Sunday, they would display Allison's picture in public areas. One day, they decided to take a different approach by painting messages on the street, retracing the steps Allison was believed to have taken from the crossing to the bridge where she went missing. The 7 messages included, "Allison, we're waiting for you." They also placed posters on poles alongside the road to grab the attention of passers-by. Around the same time, the police received a crucial lead. A man walked into the police station claiming to know Allison and have seen her on the night she vanished. According to his statement, on March 4th, around 8:30 p.m., he left his house on his motorcycle to pick someone up. While driving, he spotted Allison and noticed a 2-door, wine-colored BMW pull up beside her. He turned around to see what was happening and realized the car belonged to his cousin's BMW, which had distinctive bright yellow headlights. This made him absolutely certain it was his cousin's vehicle. Additionally, a second witness told police that they saw the same BMW that evening near where Allison went missing. This BMW belonged to 28-year-old Nelson Sanchez Urania, also known as Sukiya, a local resident who is reportedly a member of a local gang, as is commonly known. Nelson and Allison knew each other because their families had been acquainted for a long time. They even lived in the same neighborhood for a while. According to Allison's mom, she only had one brief interaction with Nelson, and it was just a casual, neighborly exchange, not a close friendship. One day, Nelson offered to drive Allison and her cousins home, and she accepted because it was daytime and she wasn't alone. She considered him a decent person. 2 days before Allison vanished, on March 2nd, 2020, Nelson sent her a message on Facebook asking her to answer some questions. Following her cousin's advice, Allison agreed. Nelson then asked how she felt about him and if she liked him, which left Allison confused since they hardly knew each other. When she asked Nelson why he was asking this, he said it was because he didn't think badly of her, but he wanted to know if she thought badly of him. Allison replied that she didn't dislike him and reassured him that everything was fine between them. Nelson thanked her and said goodbye. On March 26, 2020, detectives executed a search warrant at Nelson Sanchez Urania's residence and seized his car, mobile phone, and computer. A forensic analysis of his phone revealed a disturbing collection of images depicting the abuse of women. During the search of his car, officers were struck by its immaculate condition, with the carpets and seats having been recently cleaned with a polishing liquid. However, the front carpet of the driver's seat and the trunk carpet were missing. The police discovered human hair and blood stains on the trunk lid, which were sent to the laboratory for further analysis. Following a visual inspection of the vehicle, the police conducted a forensic examination using a service dog, which indicated the presence of blood traces on the 2 front seats and in the trunk. A luminol test confirmed these findings, revealing that the owner had attempted to destroy bloodstains throughout the car interior using cleaning products, but the chemical reacted with the hemoglobin in the blood cells, leaving traces of blood in many areas. While the detectives waited for the lab results, Nelson Sanchez Urania was not in custody, but was being closely watched. The police monitored his every move to prevent him from leaving the city or the country. Yandri urged the investigators to arrest him, but they lacked sufficient evidence to do so, and thus he remained free for several months. Yandri suspected that Allison might have been kidnapped for a ransom demand. She tried to remain calm and not give in to panic, clinging to the hope that her daughter was still alive. In anticipation of Allison's possible return, Yandri left her room exactly as it was, without tidying up or rearranging anything. She even bought gifts for Allison in case she came home. "As long as I don't see any proof that she's dead, I'll keep believing my daughter is alive and will come back home," Yandri told reporters on September 2nd, 2020. Detectives received confirmation from the laboratory that the hair and blood found in Nelson Sanchez Urania's car were a match for Allison, leading to his arrest on the same day. Further investigation revealed that Urania's ex-girlfriend experienced emotional manipulation in their relationship, as he prohibited her from socializing with friends or using the internet, demanding an exclusive connection. His former employer described him as irresponsible at work, citing an instance where he stole approximately $11,000. Moreover, his landlord shared that one of Urania's former girlfriends ended their relationship, exhausted from financially supporting him. The landlord characterized Urania as a spoiled individual. On September 4th, Nelson Sanchez Urania admitted to his involvement in Allison Bonilla's disappearance. According to his statement, on the night she vanished, he saw her walking alone on a deserted road and took advantage of the late hour. He knew Allison wouldn't hesitate to get into his car because she was familiar with him. So he offered her a ride, which she accepted. However, instead of taking her home, he drove to a coffee plantation where he forced her out of the car. He then attacked her, knocking her glasses off and nearly causing her to faint. Next, he took her to a nearby abandoned house where he assaulted her and severely beat her. Afterward, he tied her hands with cloth and duct tape, put her in the trunk of his car, and drove to a landfill in San Garano Cachi. There, he threw her off a cliff into a pile of garbage. Urania claimed that his excessive use of illegal substances and being under their influence led him to commit these acts. He also confessed to being obsessed with Allison and having long-held fantasies about her, which he decided to act upon that night. Later, Nelson Sanchez Urania recanted his confession, alleging that the police had coerced him. Nevertheless, the evidence against him was sufficient to bring charges. He faced a maximum sentence of 35 years. On September 4th, a search team went to the San Gerano landfill early in the morning to look for Allison's body. However, finding her remains proved difficult due to the vast and hard-to-reach area. Just 25 days after Urania's confession, police discovered human bones, including vertebrae, ribs, part of the pelvis, a femur, and fragments of the clothes Allison wore on the day she disappeared. They also found one of her sneakers with nails still inside. The suspect's lawyer, Jose Francisco Herrera, questioned the evidence, suggesting it could have been fabricated since it was found by a group of volunteers rather than the judicial police. Herrera also found it suspicious that the authorities found human remains in the exact area specified by Urania. On the same day, his client changed his statement and claimed innocence. Allison's family lawyer, Rodrigo Ara, slammed the change in the suspect's testimony, calling it an insult to the authorities' efforts. On October 5, 2020, experts confirmed the remains found were those of Allison Benila. Due to the incomplete recovery of Allison's body, forensic experts were unable to pinpoint the exact cause of her death. However, the expert who examined the remains determined that the numerous fractures on her body occurred after death, suggesting a fall from a great height. The torn clothes and bite marks on the sneakers led experts to conclude that animals likely scattered the remains throughout the landfill. Allison's mother, Yendri, was outraged that the police had ignored her warnings and hadn't arrested Urania sooner, which might have led to an earlier confession and potentially preserved Allison's body intact. She described the tragedy as unimaginable pain for the family, but took comfort in believing that Allison was now in a better place, safe from harm. Nelson Sanchez Urania's trial started on July 19, 2021. One of the key witnesses was Harold Sura Solano, Allison's boyfriend. He testified that Allison was at his house with his mother when he got back from work around 6:30 p.m. on March 4, 2020. He left for 5 to 10 minutes, and when he returned, Allison was gone without saying goodbye. They stayed in touch through texts while she headed home after getting off the bus. She told him that 2 men were following her. Harold offered to pay for a taxi, but Allison refused twice, saying she would run home instead. He didn't hear from her again after that. However, he claims that he only told his mother about the situation. He didn't reach out to Yendri, Allison's mother. He said he didn't contact her because his phone had died, and he dozed off for 30 minutes. It was Allison's aunt who called him and informed him that his girlfriend was missing. At that point, he says he became frightened and repeatedly tried to call Allison's cell phone, but every call went straight to voicemail. He also sent WhatsApp messages, but they didn't go through. Harold was part of the search team looking for Allison for several days, but he stopped due to feeling unwell and having to work. In hindsight, he wished he could have done things differently. He would have taken Allison home that evening if he could turn back time. Nelson Sanchez Urania was sentenced to 18 years in prison on August 18, 2021, for taking Allison's life. He could have received a longer sentence, but the judge cited the lack of evidence proving Urania knew about Allison's route and time of return home, as well as his intentions to attack her. Additionally, the condition of Allison's remains did not provide evidence of forced intimacy. However, Allison's family was unhappy with the verdict, deeming it an unfair punishment. In 2022, their lawyer appealed the decision, and the court overturned Urania's sentence, scheduling a new trial for September 28, 2023. This time, Nelson Sanchez Urania was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Allison's family lawyer accused Urania of behaving wildly, cowardly, and inhumanly, exploiting the trust of Allison and her loved ones. The court found that Urania's actions were premeditated, taking advantage of his years-long relationship with Allison to commit the crime. Urania showed no remorse, which the criminal court considered in their decision. Despite their pain and anger, Allison's family felt relief with the new verdict, finally closing a painful chapter in their lives and ending a nightmare that lasted over 3 years. They honored Allison's memory by placing a cross and flowers at the site where her body was found, creating a small altar with her photo and a statue of the Virgin Mary. The Allison Bonilla case had a significant impact on Costa Rican media and social networks, inspiring verbal tributes to the young woman and other victims of similar crimes.